No benefits, no nothing. I've tried everything and I'm getting doors slammed in my face everywhere I turn.
A growing number of people struggling to survive on Denver streets.
How would you describe homelessness in Denver right now?
Homelessness in Denver is at an emergency point.
Tens of millions being spent to address the homeless crisis, but how much of a difference does it actually make?
We need folks to come up with ways to house people safely, but less expensively, and lots more of it.
Tonight, we are going in depth, breaking down how your tax dollars are being spent to help Denver's unhoused.
Here's Denver 7 investigative reporter Jennifer Kovaleski.
Don't nobody like homeless.
Let's talk about what it's like living on the streets in the city we love.
Don't nobody talk to you. You speak to people, they turn their nose up at you.
Keith Barham's done it for 11 long years.
Just never knowing when your next meal gonna come at, when you get to take a shower. It's bad.
It's an uncomfortable side effect of a city that's become too expensive. A city at the center of a housing crisis.
How are you supposed to live? And even if I did afford an apartment, I couldn't afford to feed myself.
Year after year, Denver's homeless population keeps growing despite the city spending more money on the problem. Denver's seen a more than 40% increase in its homeless count in 5 years.
So the problem that we're addressing is worse.
The city's latest point-in-time survey, which captures just a snapshot on one night in January, counted nearly 5,000 homeless people living in Denver last year. Denver budgeted $152 million to help the unhoused in 2022. Roughly $32,000 per homeless person. Is it making a difference?
A little bit, but we are still so far, so we're putting hundreds of millions of dollars at $1 billion problem that is growing.
Benjamin Dunning lived on Denver's streets and now works for the nonprofit Homeless Out Loud. What do you think is the biggest misconception about the homeless problem in Denver?
That it has to do with individual people's actions. I mean, it has to do with the cost of housing. Denver's spending what they can, but it isn't enough.
Denver 7 Investigates analyzed the city's finances. Going back to 2019, Denver has more than doubled its budget for housing and homeless. The city plans to spend $180 million in 2023, 19% more than last year.
It's being spent better, but the truth of the matter is the solution to homelessness is housing. Every dollar that is spent outside of getting people inside, I think, is misappropriated.
The city says a little over half of its budget this year will go to housing. The rest will fund shelters and services, with 7% paying for administrative costs. And therein lies the problem.
One of the major things that most cities do is they try to hide homelessness rather than to house homelessness.
Critics that we've spoken to have questioned why the city spends so much money hiding the homeless problem.
I think the purpose of shelter is to provide a humane response to people who are in a housing crisis. I don't see it as hiding.
Britta Fisher was Denver's chief housing officer at the time of this interview. She believes the city needs to fund both housing and shelters, not one or the other. How do you balance the money you're spending on shelters and then the money that's being spent on housing?
I would say it's one of our greatest struggles right now.
Other cities have found more of a balance. The city of Houston went all in on a data-based housing-first approach. It's moved more than 25,000 homeless people directly into apartments and housing, cutting Houston's homeless population by 63% since 2011.
They have not spent much on shelter, and they have put it all towards housing, which that's great.
Why can't all of the money go towards housing in Denver?
I don't think it's acceptable for us to say it's okay for people to be dying outside. And I don't think the people of Denver find that okay. They have a different climate.
Denver does focus on a housing-first approach, but with the city still budgeting nearly half of its money on shelters and services, it makes it harder to make a dent in the issue.
Instead of them just sitting up there, putting all this money into these shelters that's not working.
For people like Keith living on our city's streets, he just wants any place to call home.
Give me an RV, I'll live in there.
And Denver's housing leader believes the city can do better. Can you ever really end homelessness?
I believe we can. And I know we can because we've seen it happen in communities.
Britta Fisher left her job with the city earlier this week. She's now the new CEO of the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless. Denver's new mayor, who will be elected later this year, could make significant changes to how the city helps the homeless. I'm Denver 7 investigative reporter Jennifer Kovaleski.
And going further in depth now, it is such a struggle in Colorado to get people who don't have permanent housing into housing, and the solutions just vary wildly.
And now 2 cities have found a path forward, looking to replicate successful solutions found outside of the metro. So let's start with Aurora. Last November, Aurora City Council approved the creation of a $50 million campus. And the concept is based on a work-first model implemented in Colorado Springs. The campus would provide homeless services and job training to help people get back on their feet. But to get long-term help, they would need to agree to certain conditions like getting job training and staying off drugs.
We're going to take care of everybody in terms of their basic needs that are experiencing homelessness by providing them basic emergency services. But we're going to concentrate our resources on the people that want to change their behavior.
All right, to Denver now. Denver operates under a housing first model introduced in Houston. It focuses on getting those unhoused into housing before getting a job or before getting sober. The city invites people to housing navigation centers, which connect them to housing resources. Tiny homes, safe camping sites are set up to act as a bridge before finding placement. Now, here's a caveat. Housing First requires having enough affordable housing, which, as you know, is in short supply in Denver. The city has allocated $254 million in the budget this year for housing, which will go toward reaching its goal of 19,000 affordable units by 2026.